Alchemist Academy PTE and Naughty Training Center Retell Lecture July 2021 Prediction File. Retell Lecture Set 1.
Today we're going to recount heroic tales of superhuman feats of strength, when in the face of disaster, some people are said to have summoned up incredible physical power to lift a car off of an accident victim, move giant rocks, or like Big John of song, single-handedly hold up a collapsing beam to let the other miners escape. Are such stories true? There are many anecdotes supporting the idea, but we're going to take a fact-based look at whether or not it truly is possible for an adrenaline-charged person to temporarily gain massive strength. In proper terminology, such a temporary boost of physical power would be called hysterical strength. The stories are almost always in the form of one person lifting a car off of another. And even lifting many cars by several inches still leaves most of its weight supported by the suspension springs. But our purpose today is not to debunk any of these specific stories. The majority of them are anecdotal, and interestingly, not repeatable. In many cases, the person who summoned the super strength later tried it again only to find that they couldn't do it. Basically, what we have is a respectably large body of anecdotal evidence that suggests that in times of crisis, danger, or fear, some people have the ability to temporarily exercise superhuman strength.
But we can really thank the Great Exhibition of 1851 for giving us the world's premier taxi service. For it was going to this exhibition, this fabulous exhibition of inventions from all around the four corners of the empire, that the visitors were appalled, dismayed and vexed by their journeys to this exhibition, because the cabbies of the day in their horse-drawn carts were absolutely terrible, could not find their way to this exhibition. And so, at great public outcry, the London authorities set up the Public Carriage Office, which is an organisation that still exists. You can take a short walk to Penton Street up the road. And this Public Carriage Office took on the responsibility of licensing all major taxi drivers in London. All taxi drivers from 1851 onwards had to pass what is now known as the London Knowledge. This phenomenal knowledge of London. What is the London Knowledge? It's the ability to remember the 25,000 streets, how they're all interconnected, and know all the main arterial roads in and out of London. Cabbies need to know all this, plus 1,000 points of specific interest, cafes, bars, public offices. They need to know them all as part of their training.
Hello, I'm David Brown, curator of Italian and Spanish paintings at the National Gallery of Art. The treasures in our exhibition, The Art of Power, Royal Armor and Portraits from Imperial Spain, come from the Royal Armory in Madrid. They range from the 15th to the 17th century and include some of the finest examples of Renaissance armor in the world. Fabricated by master craftsmen and artists, the flower of Spanish royalty. This is parade armor, made for show, not combat. In form, it looks back to a world tournaments, jousts and noble gesture. And among the images worked into the steel is something quite different, a subtle advertising campaign for the imperial ambitions of the Spanish monarchy and the Habsburg dynasty. Those who wore it took the words Holy, Roman and Empire very seriously.
Retell Lecture Set 2.
The skoog is a new universally accessible musical instrument. It is designed to use by children or adults with special needs or in fact be used by anyone. It's soft, it's easy to play, it's robust and it can be customized to suit anyone's abilities. The skoog helps students with special needs by allowing them to get involved in making music themselves. It's an instrument that they can play it and they can take ownership of and start creating their own sounds and music. Traditional instruments are the shape and size and made of the materials they are because of the sound that they need to make. If you want to make a sound like a plucked string, you need a string and it needs to be under tension, whereas with a skoog, because it's a mixture of software and a sensor, then thus the computer can handle making the sound. And so we can design an object that's designed to be touched and designed to be played with. In developing the screen and working with kids in the schools and in the classrooms, it's really helped us make the skoog something that's usable by the children themselves. They've informed us massively on how it needs to work and they've given their opinions on colors and designs. And just the feedback they've given to us has been just marvelous. It's just so enriching and it's really inspiring to actually work with these kids, particularly when you can provide them with an ability to start to playing their own music as opposed to just taking part through listening and listening to other musicians and really learning from.
And welcome to your very first tutorial in biology. Now, in this video series, what I want to do is I want to talk to you guys about many different topics concerning biology. For example, I want to talk to you guys about DNA and genetics and cells and bacteria and life and a whole bunch of interesting stuff. But since this is the very first video, I think what we should do in this video is just stick with the very basics. And the first thing I want to do is talk to you guys about what is biology? So let's go ahead and answer that question, and the definition of biology is this: the study of life and living organisms. Alright, that makes sense up to a certain point, up until organisms, because You may have heard of organisms before, and you may have your own definition, but the scientific definition of an organism is a living thing. Well, that's easy. We know what living things are. I'm a living thing. Plants, grass is a living thing. My puppy, named Old Dan, cutest puppy ever, by the way, is a living thing. But whenever we talk about living things, believe it or not, things get kind of complicated because then you have to ask yourself, what is life? Well, of course, if you ask your grandma or your best friend, or even if you ask a philosopher, what is life? Everyone is going to give you kind of a different definition of their outlook on life. However, whenever scientists and biologists were first deciding, what is life? That's the problem that they had. Everyone had their own separate definition of life itself. So what they needed to do before biology was even invented, which is of course the study of life, is scientists needed to agree on the definition of life.
That can make big things happen. Fleas and the plague, atoms and nuclear bombs, diminutive leaders in world history. Soot is one of these little things. Soot, also known as black carbon, is released when you burn dung, coal, diesel fuel, and wood. From LA to Mumbai, soot causes respiratory illnesses like lung cancer and asthma, and contributes to 1.6 million premature deaths every year, mostly among the poor. And it gets worse. Atmospheric currents carry soot thousands of miles from where it is produced to the Himalayas and the Arctic. Black carbon, being black, absorbs sunlight, so even a little soot on snow makes it melt faster. And when snow melts, global sea levels rise, threatening our freshwater, indigenous communities, and polar bears who hunt on the Arctic ice. Climate change has been a big thing for a while, and carbon dioxide has been its main cause. Scientists estimate that soot causes 25% of human-caused global warming. It's the second leading cause of Arctic warming after carbon dioxide. Let's not underestimate the impact of this tiny particle. But there's good news. Reducing black carbon may be the fastest way to slow global warming and buy time for the Arctic. Yes, even more so than changing a light bulb. And since black carbon only stays in the atmosphere for a couple of weeks, reducing it would produce results immediately. Of course, reducing soot alone won't solve global warming, but solving our soot problem now will help buy time for the Arctic and allow us to deal with the bigger problem of carbon dioxide. We have the cleaner industries, cook stoves, and diesel. Now we have to use them. In developed nations, we've significantly reduced our black carbon, but we still have much more to do. We need to tighten our standards at home and invest in cleaner technologies in developing nations. In a world going on 7 billion people, you might feel rather little yourself. But if you urge the US government and the European Union to take the lead on black carbon reduction, you can make a big difference. Go to stopsoot.org and help stop these little things from causing big trouble.
Retell Lecture Set 3.
Let's say if I'm asking which source do you often use to get information? Newspaper, radio, TV, and the survey shows 62% of the people chose internet. You might be thinking I am going to say how important the internet is or how quickly it has changed the world for a few years. But what if I tell you this survey is conducted on the website globalandmail.com? Our answer will be different. Because the people who did this survey on a website must be frequent users of internet. This sample is a biased sample. So we have to pay attention to how a survey is conducted.
Cities are interesting places. Some cities are carefully planned, though for a reason, and reflect the needs of people as it grows. Others are less conscientiously designed. Paris, for example, was originally founded in the 3rd century as a small village. And with every passing generation, it grew in size and importance. It grew from a medieval city to a modern city. But the transition was not always smooth. Emperor Napoleon III had to hire someone to oversee the rebuilding of Paris. The man he chose was George Eugene Haussmann. In 1853, Haussmann began the process of renovating France's capital city. His basic instructions were to bring light and air into the central districts, improve the sanitation and living areas, and make Paris a more modern, beautiful city, not your average weekend renovation. Haussmann's projects included the destruction of the old medieval neighborhoods, widening of streets, building large parks and public squares, and addition of fountains and sewer lines. To add to all of this, the size of Paris had to be increased, doubled actually. And Napoleon III issued official decree annexing nearby suburbs to make them part of the city. One of the main priority of this massive renovation was to connect all of the districts together. If we think of Paris like a house, each district was its own room, existing essentially, independently of the other districts. Napoleon III wanted it to be easier to travel between the most important districts. And to create a sense of this being one unified city, not a series of independent neighborhoods. So Haussmann created large avenues that connected the districts. More than that, he made all the avenues look roughly the same. Buildings on a major avenue were required to be roughly the same height and style, and even had to use the same creme-colored stone for the facade. The result was to remove any local characteristics and create a uniform Paris. For the first time, the city had a specific look, a style that people began to associate not with a district but with Paris itself.
But what we are going to discuss today is how the Port of London was discovered and what we discovered about it. Now if you look at the historical records of Roman London, there is only about 14 actual references to London in antiquity, contemporary references. And although only one is in the 1st century, there are none at all at the 2nd or 3rd century. There is only one in the late 3rd century and there is 4 in the 4th century. So if you are a historian trying to write the history of Rome in London, it's really difficult. You don't have much data, you're going to depend on the archaeological evidence, the material evidence of the port and indeed the town to have any understanding of what happened then. And so, what we're looking at here is how did we discover about the Port of London. There is no historical documentations, no customs books, no terrorists, no idea of the taxes. We have to understand the port entirely from the archaeological evidence.
Retell Lecture Set 4.
As Joanne pointed out, only one country, tiny little Bhutan, wedged between China and India, has adopted the gross national happiness as the central index of government policy, and actually has a good deal of success in education and in health and in economic growth and in environmental preservation. They have a rather sophisticated way of measuring the effects of different policies on people's happiness. They are the only country to go that far. But you are now beginning to get other countries interested enough to do kind of white paper policy analyses of happiness research. What effects would it have if we used it more for public policy? You are beginning to get countries like Australia, France, Great Britain, that are considering publishing regular statistics on happiness. So it is beginning to become a subject of greater interest for policymakers and legislators in different advanced countries.
The impact on young Australians who are interested in buying a home of their own has been very significant. Australia's housing affordability now shapes the typical housing cycle or housing career, as some people call it. Most Australians in the normal course of events are people who move through the housing cycle in a way that matches the stages of life that they're at. So, they move out of the family home in their late teens or early 20s as they gain their independence from their families, then they rent-save for a home they can afford as either a group, or maybe a couple. And maybe they can upgrade it when they have a family in their middle age. They are more than likely to have paid off their mortgage. And that means they have housing security in their old age. That's no longer the typical housing cycle for Australians. Young people generally live at home for much longer than they once did. They generally rent for longer and they're more likely to be saddled with a mortgage not just into their middle age but more often than not into their retirement as well. In fact, in 2006, 65,000 retiree households were still paying off the mortgage. Affordable rent is also an elusive right around Australia. We have very low rental vacancies, we see high turnover as landlords want to maximize their profits in tight market, and we see less long-term or lifelong rental, as we see in other countries and other economies.
Our civilization, which subsumes most of its predecessors, is a great ship steaming at speed into the future. It travels faster, further, and more laden than any before. We may not be able to foresee every reef and hazard, but by reading her compass bearing and headway, by understanding her design, her safety record, and the abilities of her crew, we can, I think, plot a wise course between the narrows and bergs looming ahead. And I believe we must do this without delay, because there are too many shipwrecks behind us. The vessel we are now aboard is not merely the biggest of all time, it's also the only one left. The future of everything we've accomplished since our intelligence evolved will depend on the wisdom of our actions over the next few years. Like all creatures, humans have made their way in the world so far by trial and error. Unlike other creatures, we have a presence so colossal that error is a luxury we can no longer afford. The world has grown too small to forgive us any big mistakes.
Retell Lecture Set 5.
Computer scientist Shwetak Patel and his team are developing new sensing systems.
The initial focus was really around energy and water monitoring.
They built a new generation of smart sensors that monitor electronic interference on a home's power line or water pressure changes in the plumbing. Most of this technology has already found industrial applications, and Patel and his team turned their attention to adapting the technology for personal health monitoring.
So how do we take this noise and make it into a signal of interest was kind of the core of what we did for many years, and we're taking that work and applying it to other domains.
They're looking to take advantage of all the functionality built into our smartphones. With the user's permission, this app can use the microphone built into most smartphones to listen to background noises, such as coughing, searching for patterns that suggest a trip to the doctor might be in order.
We construct these models that try and understand how sound works, what its patterns are, and we give it a whole bunch of examples of different kinds of audio, things like people talking, things like people laughing, sneezing, and of course coughing.
This app uses a phone's camera to check hemoglobin levels in blood by analyzing the color of capillary fluids through the skin.
Generally, what happens is if you're anemic, your blood's going to be a little less red. And we take advantage of that by putting your finger over a camera of a phone. The camera of the phone can actually see the coloration of the blood.
And this test uses the camera to help parents worried about jaundice in newborn infants.
Now, jaundice is something that doctors who have seen tons of babies can just kind of figure out on a very basic level of, is this baby, do they need to get treatment, or are they in a good condition? Whereas a first-time parent has no idea necessarily what jaundice might look like.
The researchers say the built-in sensors found in smartphones are already commonplace, but their applications and their implications for our health and well-being may be more far-reaching than we ever imagined.
All my research and that I conducted with my 60 plus graduate students was motivated by the need to learn so that we can teach. Of course, some inventions happened along the way, but I have always considered that the end result, I always considered these inventions to be byproducts of the learning process. The end product for me was always better understanding, or when one really succeeded, a unifying theory that can help us in teaching the subject. I have also looked at teaching as a vehicle to try new ideas or new ways of doing things on an intelligent group of learners. That is, as a vehicle for teaching research results. In my experience, this kind of teaching is the most stimulating and motivating to students. I have also uncovered many interesting research problems in the course of teaching a subject. It is this unity of research and teaching, their close connection, and the benefits garnered by exercising their interplay that to me characterizes the successful professor.
Today we're going to recount heroic tales of superhuman feats of strength, when in the face of disaster, some people are said to have summoned up incredible physical power to lift a car off of an accident victim, move giant rocks, or like Big John of Song, single-handedly hold up a collapsing beam to let the other miners escape. Are such stories true? There are many anecdotes supporting the idea, but we're going to take a fact-based look at whether or not it truly is possible for an adrenaline-charged person to temporarily gain massive strength. In proper terminology, such a temporary boost of physical power would be called hysterical strength. The majority of them are anecdotal, and interestingly not repeatable. In many cases, the person who summoned the superstrength later tried it again only to find that they couldn't do it. Basically, what we have is a respectably large body of anecdotal evidence that suggests that in times of crisis, danger, or fear, some people have the ability to temporarily exercise superhuman strength.
Retell Lecture Set 6.
So that creates tensions, and that's what I want to talk about. Because I think it's important that we are, as a society, able to have an informed debate about how much privacy is enough but not too much, how much security is enough but not too much. Privacy, as a human right, that's simply quoting the Universal Declaration. In the physical world, we've got all kinds of protections. There is evidence that we care about our privacy. We've got locks, we've got obscured glass, we've got lots, we wear clothes, we put up shutters. And technology continues to erode the privacy that exists in the real world, in the three spatial dimensions. Security cameras, automatic number plate recognition take away anonymity. Long lenses, paparazzi, take away distance and the privacy that used to create. And body scanners are increasingly being used to see through, for example. This process isn't going to slow down, and the new quantum technologies are actually being able to do gravitational sensing. And that's advancing at a remarkable rate. And you can't shield gravity. So some of the new quantum technologies are able already to see through walls. And there are technologies also for seeing round corners now using scattered light from lasers. Technology continues to erode privacy.
Welsh is a Celtic language spoken in Wales by about 740,000 people, and in the Welsh colony in Patagonia, Argentina by several hundred people. There are also Welsh speakers in England, Scotland, Canada, the USA, Australia and New Zealand. At the beginning of the 20th century, about half of the population of Wales spoke Welsh as an everyday language. Towards the end of the century, the proportion of Welsh speakers had fallen to about 21%. According to the 2001 census, 582,368 people can speak Welsh, 659,301 people can either speak, read or write Welsh, and 797,717 people, 28% of the population, claim to have some knowledge of the language. According to a survey carried out by S4C, the Welsh language TV channel, the number of Welsh speakers in Wales is around 750,000, and about 1.5 million people can understand Welsh. In addition, there are an estimated 133,000 Welsh speakers living in England, about 50,000 of them in the Greater London area.
Take the coffee industry. The figures are roughly these. The coffee market in the world is worth about $60 billion. The growers get $5.5 billion. 10 years ago, the market was about $30 billion and the growers got a third of that. What has happened? What has happened is that well-meaning people, Americans, Germans, Europeans, decided that they would help Vietnam. And so they created a coffee industry there, which is now the second biggest producer in the world. This has serious effects on other countries like Colombia that depend on coffee exports.
Retell Lecture Set 7.
Welcome to today's lesson. We are continuing with the study of taxonomy. Taxonomy is how scientists classify organisms into different groups based on the characteristics that they share. So for instance, a good way to think about taxonomy is the US Postal Service. If we want to send a letter to someone, we first start off by addressing it to the nation they are in. By default, we usually assume that's America, but it doesn't have to be. It could be England, or Costa Rica, or Spain. Either way, you put their nation or their kingdom first. Then within that kingdom, you address it to a slightly more specific level, their states. So for instance, South Carolina will be the same as a phylum. Within that state, you would address it to their city, and then to the street number, and the street they live on. Then you would address it to, say, their apartment complex, and within that complex you address it by their last name to their family, and then finally their first name to the specific person you want to get it to. And in that way, we are able to weed out all the 400 million people we don't want to send our letter to in America, and pinpoint the exact person we want the letter to reach. In the same way, scientists use a taxonomy chart to pinpoint a living creature and organism and how it relates to everything else in the world.
Why does burning a food item provide information about its value as a food? The nutritional value of food can be measured on many different scales. The most basic measurement scale is the free energy content of the food. In other words, how much energy is released when chemical bonds within the food are broken. The energy content of food is measured in calories, the amount of kinetic energy required to raise the temperature of 1 milliliter of water, 1 degree. Food is burned under controlled conditions, breaking chemical bonds and releasing free energy. The burning is chemically similar to the breakdown of food in cellular respiration, although the process occurs much more quickly and in a less controlled fashion during ignition. Calorimeter can measure the energy in food, but cannot measure the digested energy of what we have. What I've decided to provide is the steps that I take when analyzing my own questionnaires. However, before I begin, it would be useful to remind you of a few terms we use when talking about questionnaires. Questions can be divided into 3 types. This is sometimes called level measurement. Firstly, we have category-type questions, which are also known as nominal questions. These are when participants select from a list of categories for their response, such as male or female, or they may include ethnic origin. Secondly, we have ordinal-type questions. These are similar to category questions. But instead of the categories being independent, there is some sort of order between them. If we ask people to indicate their age in categories,
This is an ordinal type question. Thirdly, we have continuous questions. These are any questions that can be answered by a number. It could be an open-ended question asking participants to tell you how many times they attended lectures or how often they used a VLE. Or it could involve asking them to rate the importance of intensity of some experience.
Retell Lecture Set 8.
There's sugar in a lot of foods where you don't expect it. And of course, there's lots of sugar in donuts or ice cream or pastries or other things that are sweet, candy of course. But there are other places where you see it and you don't necessarily expect it. So as an example, peanut butter. Here's a list of ingredients from Skippy peanut butter, and you see that sugar is the second most common ingredient. Excuse me, you may know from reading food labels that these ingredients in any food label are listed in order of how much there is in the food itself. So sugar comes right after peanuts. Here's another example, beef stew. You wouldn't necessarily expect to find sugar in beef stew, but it's there. Now it's down the list of ingredients. It's actually toward the end. But if you look at the marketing of this and look at the can, it says there's fresh potatoes and carrots, but actually there's more sugar in this than there is carrots.
The basis of all life on Earth is the cell. All creatures on Earth are made up of cells. I'm not going to dwell on the biology of cells much. It's not that relevant, but I do want to point out a few things. First of all, there are two sorts of cells. There's a thing called the prokaryotic cell, which is fairly simple, and it's the thing that all bacteria are made of. And then we have a eukaryotic cell, a much more complicated beast on the right, which didn't appear until well into the history of the biosphere on Earth. And there are many single-celled eukaryotes, but there are also, and importantly, multicellular organisms, and all of those are based on the eukaryotic cell.
The milk is not typical of all monasteries for many reasons. Firstly, it is very grand, which most especially later foundations aren't. Secondly, it was founded in the countryside, whereas in 17th and 18th centuries, a good proportion of foundations were made in towns. Thirdly, it still owns a substantial amount of land, because fourthly it lies in the Austrian Republic, the only European country where grand old monasteries have been in continuous existence since they were founded 900, 1000, even in one case 1200 years ago.
Retell Lecture Set 9.
So when we talk about the Paleo Regions, just to clarify exactly what we mean, we have first of all the Arctic at the top of the Earth and the Antarctic at the bottom. So the Arctic was named after the Greek word for bear. Now surprisingly it's not after the polar bears that live in the Arctic, but it's after the Little and Great Bear constellations that can be seen in the sky. Now the Greeks also hypothesized that there would be an anti-Arctic, which is how we get the name Antarctica, but of course it wasn't discovered until much later on. Now these regions are opposite in many ways other than just their names and their location on the globe. So if we look at the Arctic first of all, the Arctic is actually ocean surrounded by land. So we can see here, this is the UK down here, and this is kind of Russia, and then America and Canada around here. So there is a bit of land covered in ice in the Arctic, which is Greenland here, but mostly all this area here, surprisingly a lot of people don't realise that this isn't actually land. The North Pole isn't on land, it's just one big ocean.
The brain is basically built from the bottom up. First, the brain builds basic circuits that are responsible for basic skills, and then more complex circuits are built on top of those basic circuits as we develop more complex skills. Biologically, the brain is prepared to be shaped by experience. It's expecting the experiences that a young child has to literally influence the formation of its circuitry. It's built into our biology. The interaction between genetics and experience that shapes brain architecture is embedded in the reciprocal relationships that children have with adults in their lives. And by that we mean what we refer to as the serve and return nature of children's interaction with their adults. Development and the impact of experience on development is not a one-way street. It's a back and forth interaction. The brain is a highly integrated organ which has multiple sections that specialize in different kind of processes. So we have parts of the brain that are involved more in cognitive function and other parts that are involved in processing of emotion and parts involved in seeing and hearing. So if a child is emotionally kind of well put together and socially competent, that will affect more positive and productive learning. And if a child is preoccupied with fears or anxiety or is dealing with considerable stress, no matter how intellectually gifted that child might be, his or her learning is going to be impaired by that kind of emotional interference.
My name is Evie Carroll. I'm a second year studying international business. My degree subject is made up of tutorials, lectures and independent learning. And today I'm going to speak about tutorials. Before each tutorial, we're asked to prepare in advance. We're usually given a reading list, which we have to complete before each tutorial. We are given websites to look at, each annals to look at, and we have to prepare by writing our notes down. In every tutorial, there is about 5 to 15 students, and these are led by the tutors, which are usually master's or PhD students. And then when we come into the tutorial, we are put into small groups. I'm asked to discuss our ideas, generate new ideas, and then feedback to the class. During our tutorials, there's lots of support given. Our tutors are there so that we can ask questions at any time. We also have our peers there, which we can also ask questions to. If we need help before the tutorial, we can email in any of the tutors and they'll provide you with help. The difference between lectures and tutorials is that in lectures you usually have about 200 to 300 students, whereas in tutorials is about 5 to 15 students, which allows you to discuss matters, put your hands up and talk to your tutors about any difficulties you may have with a subject.
Retell Lecture Set 10.
This is a kind of object that you're probably all familiar with when you hear the term robots, but I'm going to show you the very, very first robots. These were the very first robots. They were characters in a play in the 1920s called Rossum's Universal Robots. And the play was written by a Czech writer called Karel Čapek. And basically, these robots, you know, people tend to think of robots as kind of cute, cuddly toys or, you know, Hollywood depictions kind of devoid of politics. But the first robots were actually created and imagined in a time of absolute political turmoil. You just had the First World War, you know, finished. That had a devastating impact across Europe. And so people were kind of reflecting on what does it mean to be human, what makes us human, those kind of questions. And this kind of context is what inspired Čapek to kind of write this play. And interestingly, these robots, being human, they are actually in the play assembled on a production line, a bit like the Ford manufacturing production line. So even though they are human, they are assembled, and these robots are designed to labor, and that is their primary purpose in society.
Stages of brain development during childhood. There are 3 stages, starting from the primitive brain, limbic brain, and finally to the neocortex. Although interrelated, the 3 had its own function. Primitive brain functions to manage the physical to survive, manage reflex, motor motion control, monitoring body functions, and process information coming from sensing, limbic brain functioning as a liaison to process emotions and the brain thinks, and the primitive brain. While the thinking brain, which is the most objective part of the brain, receiving input from the primitive brain and the limbic brain. However, he needed more time to process information from the primitive brain and the limbic brain. The brain thinks the merger is also a place of experience, memory, feeling, and thinking ability to give birth to ideas and actions. Nerve myelination of the brain takes place in sequence, starting from the primitive brain, the limbic brains, and brain thought. Neural pathways are more frequently used to make more myelin thicken. Increasingly thicker myelin, the faster the nerve impulses or signals travel along nerves. Therefore, a growing child is encouraged to receive input from the environment in accordance with its development.
He says innovation equals invention. Let me just stop here. Innovation equals invention. Often people mistake these 2 things for the same thing. Innovation equals invention, they are not. Innovation is something that generates value for the world. It makes something faster, better, cheaper. It gives someone some great satisfaction. An invention is an idea, a technology, a patent. In and of itself, it does not generate value. So these 2 are not the same thing. And sometimes you see them interchange. And that's not correct. So innovation equals invention times commercialization. So and when we look at this equation of innovation, something of value, it requires a new idea, and then it requires someone or some organization that is going to commercialize that idea. And to make it a value to the world.